On a dry, whipping morning, I poured coffee into a cracked china mug when my son said, "Sell the old cattle brand. This is 4.0 now." I didn't argue. That afternoon, the foreman set down the brand book, a notched iron, and a receipt with a strange name. I'm Raymond, 68. My left leg still numb after last winter's hip surgery. Out on the high plains, the wind starts before the sun shows. It runs in long ribbons over the ridgelines, hauling the smell of dry grass and salt dust sitting in the furrows. Every morning I brew a pot of black coffee and pour it into a chipped china mug. The one thing of Mara's that still holds the warmth of her hand. The crack is a thin ring. Everyone tells me to toss it, but I keep using it. A cracked thing that doesn't leak can still do its job, like a man after surgery who still finds his way to the cattle pens before daybreak. My boy Evan came back from the city 2 calving seasons ago. He brought a shiny silver laptop, glossy handouts, and words that sound like they were made somewhere else. Livestock data platform. Smart cold chain. ROI for the brand. He said the world had changed, that the brand, the hot mark pressed into a calf's hide to make our hooked R, was just a logo, and logos should be optimized. I didn't argue, not because I agreed, but because at my age I've learned something. When the young talk at the pace of their heartbeats, the old should listen at the pace of their breathing. That morning when he dropped "Sell the brand," the windmill creaked like somebody turning an old back. I looked through the window. Low fog clung to the edge of the pasture, and the puddle by the ditch threw up a pale strip of sky. On the rack hung the branding iron, its head with a tiny notch like a grain of rice. My father called it the notch, a way to know our own like a familiar mole on a cheek. Every time the iron glowed and touched a calf, there was a short hiss, a singed hair smell, and Mara's voice in my head. "Ray, don't let your hand shake. That mark is the herd's lineage. One wrong millimeter, and it'll carry the wrong scar for life." Yes, I learned not to shake, until the day my legs started trembling from bone-deep cold. Evan laid his papers out like cards, circles and columns in blue and green. "Look, Dad, if we license the brand to a partner, they'll handle marketing, shipping, freezing. We take a cut without worrying about drought discounts. They've got experts to value the land and the water. We move with the times." I asked slow, "Which experts?" He said, "Mr. Caldwell. You've met him, right?" I knew Caldwell. He came here last fall with a gold-trimmed fountain pen and shoes so clean I wondered if he was allergic to dirt. He talked sweet, nodding on the porch like a cottonwood in wind, said he'd update the value of our place. The number he brought back was so low the afternoon wind sounded offended. I folded the sheet and set it beside my coffee. "Whatever the times are," I said, "they still need water." Evan smiled. "Relax, Dad. They handle the water rights too." Half a day later, Hector knocked. He's the foreman, 58, built like a cured fence post, talks even less than the wind. Hat in his hands, he stood right at the rug's edge like he didn't want to track dust inside. "Mr. Ray," he said, flat and steady, "I need you to see this." He put the brand book on the table, our scuffed leather ledger with black oil fingerprints from me and Mara. Then he set down a branding iron, looked just like the one hanging on the rack, but the head was too round, missing that tiny notch. Last came a paper, some kind of deposit receipt fresh from a printer, ink still smelling new. "Where's the notch?" I asked. Hector didn't answer. He tapped the iron's head with a fingernail. The sound was dull, not the ring of old steel. I lifted the receipt. The receiver's signature was smeared, but the name was clear. Caldwell and Sons Land Services, LLC. Under that, deposit, brand transfer consulting. Noon slid in and the wind hiccuped like it wanted to change directions. I sat on the porch steps. The wood creaked under my heel. Evan kept talking from the kitchen about pitching investors and octane standards for the cold chain. His voice fell in even drops like rain that never reaches the ground. I fed the stove and set the kettle on, watching a thin smoke line stain the ceiling. Another thing I learned after my wife passed. When you don't understand, don't rush to speak. When you do, don't rush either. Hector took the chair opposite, his heavy hands laced. "Mr. Ray," he said softer. "This morning, I saw Caldwell's aide's black car by the feed shed. Here's a still from the barn cam." He handed me a blurry print. Someone bent over the shelf where we keep tools. A flash like steel knocking steel. I shivered, not from fear, but because I could hear Mara again. "Don't let your hand shake." "All right," I said. "Hector, this afternoon we go to the brand office. Bring the book. Bring this iron." Evan heard and turned. "Dad, no need to make a scene. I'm just exploring price. Nobody brands with heat anymore. They use chips." I set my palm on the brand book's cool cover. "You do your work," I said, slow. "Mine is to make sure you know whose ground you're standing on." I reached for my heavy coat and braced my hip. The sky was flat, a swatch of gray felt. Crows sat on the fence line, flaring and folding wings, eyes like dull rivets. The road into town crunched under the tires. Each pothole was a low note from a guitar with slack strings. I thought about that missing notch. To an outsider, it's just iron. To someone inside the house, it's the way you tell kin. Switch the mark, and everything becomes a stranger. On the seat beside me, the brand book lay open to a page in Mara's hand. The blue ink had faded, but I could still see where she wrote calf names, first weights, vaccine shots, weaning dates. In the tilt of her letters there was one darker spot, like a thumb had pressed there when sweat ran. A calf follows its mother. A wrong mark makes it lose her. I laid my finger on that line and listened to the wind change pitch outside the window. Town appeared, post office timbers, the saddle repair shop, and the flaking white brand office sign. I cut the engine and paused a beat before opening the door. The smell of old paper and pine oil slid through the lid like a memory. Doesn't hit hard, just clings. Hector followed with the ledger in one arm and the wrapped iron in the other. I didn't know who began switching irons first, an outsider or an insider in a hurry. But I knew a brand isn't just hot steel and hide. It's a line of fire written through 3 generations, from my father's hand to mine and, if he understood, to my son's. I lifted my chin, took a lungful of dry air, and pushed the door. The door chime tinkled like a new-weaned calf's first call, small, shaky, needing its right name. I walked into the brand office with that slight tilt in my step, heels clicking on worn boards. The room held paper, pine oil, and a hint of stove smoke dragging itself along the curtain. Behind the counter sat Mrs. Whitaker, hair white as a rope rinsed in frost, eyes black and bright as 2 beans polished clean. She's been the county brand inspector longer than I can count with the cracks in my hands. "Morning, Ray," she said, voice low and warm like a wool blanket kept near a hearth. "Been a while." "I brought the brand book," I said, sliding the ledger over, "and an iron." Hector unwrapped the burlap and laid the iron down. Weak noonlight showed that round, notchless head. She looked at it long enough for me to hear the wall clock. "Where's the notch?" she asked, same way I'd asked Hector. "That's my question," I said. "And there's a power of attorney with my name floating around." She opened the ledger, flipped the pages with the tips of her fingers, and blew dust off Mara's handwritten lines. She pushed her glasses up, glanced from the iron to a yellow envelope out of a drawer. "2 days ago," she said, "we got a preliminary filing to transfer use of the Hooked R brand from you, Raymond Holt, to a new LLC down south. They presented a notarized power of attorney. The signature shakes like someone just ill or post-surgery. But the shake is wrong. Wrong place for a left-hand tremor after a hip procedure." I drew a slow breath. "You're right," I said. "I write left-handed since surgery. My tremor lands at the tail of the Y, not at the top of an R." She nodded. "I held it for comparison." "Lucky you came." Out came the copy. The word Raymond wandered across the line. I knew the kind of fake it was. People try to perform a tremor without knowing where it truly falls. "I'd like you," she said, pulling out a blank, "to sign your name 3 times. Once loose, once with a light brace, and once fast. Left hand, like you do." I did it. I never wrote pretty, but ugly has its order. Whitetails droop like a blade of grass. The R cinches then shoots straight, and my pen digs just before the slant, not after. She clipped the samples to a suspected forgery packet and stamped a freeze on any brand transfer until it was cleared. Hector was quiet, eyes steady as water-soaked wood. His thumbs rubbed a knuckle slow as a clock. Mrs. Whitaker measured the iron thickness, the hook angle, the depth of bend. She paused at the spot where the notch should be, the rice grain chip. "This iron was reforged," she said, almost to herself. "New heat, different tone." She looked at us. "Someone made a copy." "I think Caldwell," Hector said, finally. "The barn cam caught somebody last night. I saw black tire marks by the dry ditch behind the slough. Caldwell's name passed through that wood-lined room like a vulture's shadow." "You know him," she said to me. "He valued my place," I said. "Offended the wind." "If the appraiser is also the buyer," she said, "it's not about price anymore. Around here, a brand transfer isn't just the right to burn a mark. With the water board's rules, any change that shifts quarantine pens can mess with seasonal water quotas. A company that hoards brands can grab quarantine access, inspection routes, and the public range corridor. I've seen this trick in the next county." "I need the water board," I said. She nodded. "They meet this afternoon at the small town hall. You should go." Then, like a mother would warn an old son, "Bring the real iron if you find it." Out in the wind again, a cold finger pushed my hair. A quiet I hadn't felt in years settled in. The kind you feel before walking a young horse over a shaky bridge. You don't say much. You just place your feet. We followed the dry ditch behind the slough where Hector had seen the tires. By late drought, the channel was mostly dark mud, the ground cracked like hands in deep winter. Hector led, each step printing deep. "Here," he said. A slump in the mud, and a trail like something long had been dragged. Lyle, our youngest hand, shoveled with a serrated spade. "Easy," Hector warned. Lyle hauled up a shape wrapped in heavy nylon. Mud musk hit us. Hector slit the stitching with his pocket knife and peeled it back. The iron lay there, old steel, dark like a burned bone. I looked straight at the hook's head. The notch, tiny, unmistakable, was right where it should be, like a family mole you know without thinking. "Sweet Lord," Lyle breathed. "They stashed it here." I ran a finger over the notch. Cold crept into my skin like a name called from long ago. "Home," I said. "Clean it with oil. Set it near the stove. We're taking it to the town hall." Evan was on the porch when we drove in. He eyed the wrapped iron with a pinch of annoyance. "How long are you going to keep up this antique theater?" He said, too calm. "Customers don't need a notch to trust. They trust digital verification and chips." "People trust what lets them sleep," I said. "Around here they sleep because a calf wearing our mark has for 3 generations. Because a handwritten ledger says so. Because Mara stood by the pen at every weaning. Chips are fine. Chips don't carry forge smoke and sweat." "Dad, you make it sound like folklore," he scoffed. "This is business." "I'm trying to keep the place alive." I knew he had his own fear. Startup debt, the itch to prove he wasn't just a boy under my shade. But some roads only lead to cliffs. I boiled water and rinsed off mud and oil. The notch winked like a fisheye in the dark. By afternoon, the town hall's brass bell jingled as folks came in. Long room, 2 ranks of benches. The waterboard sat at the end. 3 men and a woman, faces sunburned, hairlines pasted with wind. Brand inspector's table to the left. Mrs. Whitaker with a stack of files. Caldwell came in behind us in a soft blue suit, gray tie, shoes polished so bright you could read the sky in them. He smiled, a buttered smile on white bread. "Mr. Holt," he said, "and Mr. Hector. Good to see you." "I'm here to do this right," I said even. They started with the water quota. Snowmelt late, dry season long, quota trimmed. Then brand transfers and quarantine facilities. Mrs. Whitaker stood, her voice slow and clear. "We received a request to transfer use of the hooked R from Mr. Holt to a new LLC called Plains Consolidated. A notarized power of attorney was attached. I found signature irregularities and paused processing per code." Caldwell stood, teeth in a line like planted trees. "We merely consult," he said, "representing the buyer in unifying brands for better High Plains beef value via advanced traceability. Mr. Holt is a respected man, but we must face forward." "Facing forward," I repeated, slow, so I didn't raise my voice. "While your hand reaches back to turn off the water." The room narrowed. Hector set the iron on Whitaker's table with a neat thud. She wiped the head and lifted it. This is the original. It has the left edge notch. The iron brought in earlier lacked it. I suspect a reforge. The board asked for more. I told about the barn cam, the tires, the mud-wrapped iron. Lyle showed the blurry print. He doesn't talk well in rooms. His cracked rope hands did the rest. Caldwell smiled and called it rural dramatics, but it bent when Whitaker raised the POA copy. "Mr. Caldwell, were you present at notarization?" "No," he said. "We only assisted the file." "Then why?" she asked. "Does submitter list your aid? And why was the rush transfer fee charged to a card tied to Caldwell and Sons?" The air got thick. Caldwell swallowed. "We just wanted to save Mr. Holt trouble." The board nodded, and the woman, Sanchez, known for disliking buttered words, cut in. "Save trouble by filing a change that alters quarantine access, and, by extension, water distribution without a public hearing. Water is the artery here. Whoever consolidates quarantine and corridors gets an unfair leg up on seasonal allocation. We'll be looking at that." "Chase." Evan stood, pale under the neon. He made that little smile he uses when he's drowning. "I'm trying to save the ranch," he said, looking for a friendly face. "Small outfits die if they don't modernize. Plains Consolidated guarantees sales, stable prices, sponsor the chips." "How?" Sanchez cut him off. "By collateralizing your family brand? By letting the land appraiser also be the brand aggregator and the water gatekeeper?" Caldwell spoke a hair too fast and stripped his own wire. "We need to ensure access to quarantine and the public range corridor. Standardized logistics. Too late, everyone heard. Everyone." "I have this," I said, laying Mara's legacy on the table. "Standardize whatever you like. Get past this first." I opened Tamara's page and tapped her line. "A calf follows its mother. A wrong mark makes it lose her." Then I set down a sheet, an excerpt from the Family Operations Trust. The hooked R lives in a trust Mara formed. Reversion clause. If any heir uses the brand as risky collateral, control reverts to the trust. As trustee, I can veto any brand transfer. Evan looked like someone kicked his chair out from under him. He turned to me, eyes wet. "You hid this from me?" "I didn't hide," I said, letting each word fall like rare rain. "Your mother wrote it. I kept the book on the shelf without a lock. You didn't read." The room tightened. In Evan, I could see a fire, anger tangled with old shame. He's my son. I know his shame the way I know the smell of his coat when he was little. But this wasn't a head pat moment. This was fence mending in a windstorm. Whitaker closed the file. "I'm denying the transfer," she said, "and I'm forwarding the forged POA to the county attorney." Sanchez nodded. "The water board is opening an inquiry into cross-dealing between appraisals, brand aggregation, and water allocation. All Holt quarantine changes are frozen pending results." Caldwell tried to hold level. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a misunderstanding." "You can keep talking in court," Sanchez said, calm as a winter creek. After the meeting, the wind shifted and carried a scent of far rain, though the sky stayed dry. Hector handed me a rough cotton handkerchief. "That's one stretch done," he said. "Not the last," I said. "There's one at home." Evan stood off to the side, hands in pockets, shoulders slumped like an idle mill. I asked him to walk with me. The dirt road runs down to a dry run where we water the horses in wet years. "You're going to hate me," I said. No detours. For a while. Then less. He gave a sour little smile. "You think I'm a child?" "I don't think," I said, and my father's old word slipped out. "I know." We walked a bit. Then he stopped, hands clasped behind his head. "I'm trapped in the loan, Dad. The startup's broke. They said we just needed the brand as temporary collateral. They said it was safe. Caldwell promised a retro. If you didn't like it, he'd unwind it. I believed. I wanted to show you I can build, not break." His voice sounded like a lost calf in fog, thin, stubborn, not yet knowing fear. "If you want to build, you need to know where the footings are," I said. "The Holt footings are the brand, the book, the water. We can add chips, add cold chain steps, add spreadsheets. Lose the brand and the water, and we've just got a pretty tin roof on sand." He said nothing. Wind threaded through the junipers. Small stones ticked down the slope like knuckles on a table. "I'm not charging you," I said, "but you're signing a recovery agreement. 5 years you don't touch trust assets. You pay the loan with work. Winter feeding, spring calving, summer fence, fall sale barn. Each season you write entries in the brand book with your pen and your sweat. If you want chips, we'll do chips. If you want co-op sales, we'll listen. But the brand stays. The water stays. Caldwell, let the law ask him questions." He stared at me a long time, like he was looking through age, disappointment, and two thick Holt skulls. 5 years, he repeated. "That's a long time." "I've lived this long," I said. 5 years feels like one hard winter." He sat on a flat rock and bent his head between his knees. I didn't touch him. Sometimes a hand on the shoulder is just a way to dodge truth. I let the wind do what wind does, move through and dry what needs drying. The days found their slow gait again. At dawn, Hector tapped my door. Evan rose earlier than me, checked yardage of rope, inspected feed troughs, wrote weights for newly weaned calves. At first his writing stumbled like a toddler's steps. By the 3rd week, the lines steadied and the numbers fell into columns. Lyle and June took turns photographing the herd and logging chips, Evans asked. "Without chips," he said, "we lose the out-of-state restaurant accounts. They want one scan and the whole vaccine history." I nodded. "Fine, but the chip doesn't replace the pen." He didn't argue. He closed the ledger and set it beside the reader. One hot noon we repaired a broken stretch of fence. The sun was just mean enough to run sweat down spines. Evan swung the hammer. Hector set the post. I stretched the wire. On the 3rd nail, Evan stopped. "I didn't know Mom wrote that much in the book," he said to the fence more than to me. "I always thought she just liked pretty notes." "She wrote to remember," I said, "and so you would. She knew this day." He looked up, eyes red like dust had hit them. "Do you hate me?" "No," I said. "But I'm mad, like the wind is mad at a rotten fence. The wind blows, the fence falls. The wind passes, we stand it back up. Anger is wind's job, standing it up is ours." That night, Caldwell called. His voice was soft as a velvet cushion. "Mr. Holt, we're practical men. I can sweeten the deal. License me the brand 3 seasons. You keep the water rights. I'll pay off your son's loan. Discreetly." "I'm not selling," I said, counting each word. 3 seasons is 3 calf births. Don't knock on a door with a brand book hanging inside." "You'll regret it," he snapped, patience gone. "You're stuck in the past." "I live in the past the way roots live in soil," I said. "I'm not chained to it. I know where the footing is when I raise a house. Goodbye, Caldwell." I hung up. Next day a notice came, county attorney calling Caldwell and his aide on forged filing. I didn't cheer. Old men rarely cheer when someone gets hauled to court. But the weight on my chest shifted. Sometimes justice doesn't need a shout. It walks slow like a cow who always finds the gate. Calving came, morning low, like a blanket. A cow's breath made a little cloud. Evan knelt and caught the wet calf, a piece of night sliding from its mother. I handed him a burlap towel. He wiped the nose, hands not so clumsy now. The calf choked once, then found that first thin, stubborn cry, like chimes tapping. "Name it," I said. "B12 or B15. Your call, but write it down." "I like Mara 23-1, he whispered, as if afraid to bother someone who wasn't there. I nodded. Names sometimes pull a family line back from getting lost. Hector heated the true iron. Fire licked the steel red. He looked at me. I weighed it. This tool that is also a family tree. I passed it to Evan. His forefinger shook. "Don't let your hand shake," I said, and Mara's words came out of me. He bit his lip, waited for the white-hot hue, and pressed. Decisive. A short hiss. Burnt hair. The calf jumped and settled. When he lifted, the hooked R stood clear, and the notch left a tiny dot, like a music note on a staff. Evan exhaled like he'd walked a hard road and reached a gate. We doused the head, and it sizzled. Evan set the iron on the bench and watched the red fade on the calf's hide. "I thought the chip would hold everything," he said. I get it now." "You get part of it," I said. "The rest comes from dawns you're up for." Season after season. A month later, we shipped a first lot with both chips and brand book snapshots for a neighboring state. Evan wrote the intro letter himself, no fluff. Just said, "Holt beef now comes with Mara's handwriting alongside the chip data." The lot moved faster than usual. Restaurant owners called to say they liked having a scan and a story. "Looks like folks want both," Evan said, voice lighter. "I think I'm learning to stand between old and new." That evening I sat by the stove, paging the old ledger and Evan's new one. His hand still had stiff corners, but each page was a boot placed firm. I poured coffee, set the cracked mug in its old spot, and let the smell of coffee mix with wood smoke and oiled steel. In the wind sneaking through the window crack, I could almost hear Mara laugh. Not near, not far. No lecture, no scold. Just there. The door opened. Hector came in with a paper. "Mr. Ray," he said. "County attorney says Caldwell took a misdemeanor on false filing and settled civil. His aide got community service. Plains Consolidated withdrew their brand merge petitions." "Right," I said. "When the wind passes, the fence stops shaking." I folded the paper and tucked it inside the ledger. "Tomorrow, we check the north pasture. Third post looks tired." Hector smiled the gentle smile of a man used to living with a little less than plenty and a little more than not enough. "Any post can be replaced. A notch can't." One icy morning I woke later than usual. Old man's sleep sometimes drops deep like a puddle after rain. White light spread across the window. Fog thrown like a thin cloth over the pasture. Evan sat at the table with the new ledger. He placed a small brown notebook beside it. On the cover, in crooked letters, "Brand book. Evans." "I made this," he said, not looking at me. "So my entries don't chew up the old pages. I want to learn Mom's way, but I know I can't write like her. I'll write like me, but I'll keep her naming, and I'll fill all the blanks." He slid it over. I set my hand on the cover, warm from his pocket. On the wall, the iron hung in its place, the notch catching weak light. I stood very carefully, afraid to wake what can't be seen in this house. Old sadness, old joy, Mara's soft step on these boards. I reached to square the hook. Evan fetched a chair and held his hands up. "I've got it." I sat, a small thing, but that morning something young inside my ribs found a just right place to lie down. Crows dotted the fence, black exclamation points at the end of the wind sentence. I sipped coffee and listened to the windmill creak. Every sound felt carved with a knife into the morning. People say you have to go far to see home. Sometimes you just need to step back and lay a hand on an old ledger. Evan spoke last, brief. "I'm sorry." I nodded. "Yep." I didn't add, "I forgive you." Forgiveness can be a signed ticket from someone in charge. What we needed was to set posts in a wind. Forgiveness would come in the doing. Him waking early, me walking a half step slower so he could keep pace. Summer threw a blanket of sun over us. We moved the herd north where the grass felt like the back of a fat cow. The gate clanged a note I've known all my life. Evan opened the path. Hector lugged fresh wire, and I counted heads through the opening. The wind brought a sweet mix of weeds and warm iron. At the far edge, an old man leaned on a stick. I knew him. The retired blacksmith from the saddle shop years back. He nodded at me, then lifted his chin at our iron. "Pretty notch," he said, voice like a hammer kissing an anvil. "Don't ever polish it out." "I won't," I said. He smiled and shuffled off like an old ox stepping out of a mud lot. I watched him and thought of the old men here, who held their trades with both heart and joints. When they go, what notches will remain? I slid a hand over the ledger in my pocket, felt my sweat soak the leather, and thought, that's enough. Late that day, a rare rain came down, straight stitches sewing the cracked ground. The herd tucked in, dark backs gleaming. Evan ran to pull the panels in, hair pasted to his forehead, grinning like a boy. I stood under the eave with my palm on a post, feeling drops knock my fingers. In the rain's noise, I heard Mara call a calf's name. Life follows life. Maybe that was memory playing tricks, maybe it was wind. I didn't argue. At night, the stove burned a modest flame. Hector read out some lines from the old ledger, his voice rocking like a boat in rain. I closed my eyes and let Mara's words turn like dry leaves. When Hector stopped, the room held still. Evan opened his new book, set his pen down, and hesitated. I nodded. He began. Mara 23-1, 72 pounds, first shot, weaning date, blank. His letters weren't pretty, but they knew where to stop. I cracked the window. Rain smell came in with smoke and the leather of the saddle hanging in the corner. On the wall, the iron's shadow slanted, the notch making a neat dark dot like a sleeping child's eye. I thought of Caldwell and his promised regret. Regret is a big word. At my age, I pick smaller ones. Hold, set, count, lift. They work better. I turned to Evan. Tomorrow you and Hector go see the water board, I said. Ask about the support program for the Big East Trough. This year we add a tank. You do the paperwork. Tell Mrs. Sanchez you're with the Holtz, not with any company. Yes, sir, he said, no wobble in it. Before bed, I set the two ledgers side by side. The old cover was worn, and the new still smelled of paper. I didn't pray out loud. For a second, my finger caught on the edge as if someone's hand rested on mine from behind. I looked back. No one. Just wind changing key outside, and the wall clock keeping the job it always keeps. Without praise, without record. Next morning I rose early. Left hand still a little numb, same as always. I carried the coffee out to the porch. The wind touched my skin like an old friend joking. In the kitchen, Evan made a clatter that made the house sound young. Hector crossed with a new coil of wire and nodded. Lyle pedaled in through the mud the rain left and hollered, "Mr. Ray, somebody called in for more beef." I waved that I heard and took a sip. I thought about the road we've walked in these few short weeks. From fake iron to true notch. From forged papers to the real book. From the loud talk of modern cold chains to the slow breath of a herd changing seasons. More wind will come. More Caldwells will come. We're still here. On this land, still here means the windmill still squeaks in the morning, the gate still counts the cattle, and a calf's name still gets inked in a book. At noon in the pen, I set my palm on the brow of the oldest cow. She shut her eyes and leaned her forehead to my shoulder for one beat and stepped on. Inside my chest, I heard a small click, like a latch set right after being off for years. I don't have a name for that. That afternoon, I wrote one more line in the ledger. North wind shifted. East fence. Sound. Evan came back and laid a waterboard paper on the table. They'd approved support for the new tank without messing with our base allocation, plus a smart meter program. I nodded. Good paper, I said. He smiled and wrote in the ledger. East tank. Install on the 12th. When the sun dropped behind the hills, the sky turned bronze-burned. I hung the iron back on the nail my father used. The notch caught the last light like a fisheye looking back. I rubbed the iron's head, old skin on old steel, and felt a small, coal-red warmth inside ash. Tomorrow and all the days after won't run out of jobs. New calves, hay, books, waterboard forms, out-of-state orders, the third post up north, a south fence that will rattle when the wind swings, and somewhere a new Caldwell smiling flat. But here, in this house, we put the notch back where it belongs, and when the notch is in its place, everything else, coming or going, knows where to stand.